actually am flattered I actually have an audience, because Randy Oliver is opposing me, and I was wondering if Sandy is even going to show up to my talk this morning. But I just want to say I've switched my management strategy from importing queens into my operation to making my own queens. And I'm not, like, I'm 3 years into this, I'm kind of fresh into queen breeding and such, so I'm not going to lecture you on that, because there's people in the audience probably knows more about that than I do. I'm still in the learning process, but what I can do is, what I'm here to do is to show you the process I put around on incorporating this sustainable queen management system into my commercial operation. So I'm just here basically to show you the system I've implemented. So I have about 1,200, 1,500 hives on my farm. They're honey production hives. My strategy on my farm is honey production and wintering. Those are my two strategies. So I'm looking at 500, 600 queens I need. I usually get them from California, Hawaii, I've got some from Chile, New Zealand. So they've come all over the place. Okay, so reasons to shift to a self-sustainable queen management system. Quality and longevity. And I want to be really careful, and I don't want that to sound critical, because there's queen producers, especially in California, these big guys are producing thousands of queens. They dwarf what I'm doing here with their breeding programs and the quality of product they do put out. But there is something happening from their queen banks to my hive that is bringing a non-thriftiness into the queens. So somewhere along the step there, we're finding a deficiency, and maybe we're not getting the quality and longevity that we would of the import queens, as if we'd raise our own queens that stay in that box that they're mated in. So that's one criticism most beekeepers give. Availability, in Manitoba, everybody splits middle May into June, and nobody really plans ahead, and everybody wants those queens at that time. They're phoning being made, and they say, oh, we want these queens now. So there's never enough queens, especially if the spring's been good. Logistics and managing weather. This is my biggest reason for switching into sustaining my own queens, or bringing my own queens in, is just to help me manage my workload and cash flow. Because these queens, we're buying them in now. I bought some in last year, they're $45. That's a lot for a bug in a little cage. And biosecurity, Carlos was just showing some slides up here with the number of viruses our bees are influenced with right now is just staggering. I can't even keep up to them. And we're focusing on one, which is deformed wing virus, but we have so many viruses. So we bring queens in from all the way around the world. We're bringing in virus into our operations. So biosecurity has to be a consideration to all this. So my personal reasons for shifting into self-sustainable queen management is logistics and workload. I buy 500, 600 queens, and to manage my workload through the spring, I do it over 3 weeks. So I'd have 200 queens come 1 week, then 200, and then 200 come the next week. And the first week's okay, because I get my work done, use up all the queens. The second week, it starts getting behind, and there's more queens left in the bank, and then we have a week of bad weather, so then I have to use up the queens in the bank, and then there's queens coming in the mail yet, and they're sitting on my desk. Then we get another week of bad weather, and there's nothing more stressful than having tens of thousands of queens that should be in your bank, because they're on your desk, because they should be in your bank, because you can't use them because you're not getting your work done. So I'm just trying to find a way to manage my workload a little bit better in the narrow season window that we have, and just trying to manage my workload a lot more efficiently. So this is one of the reasons why I'm doing it. The big disadvantage for us to raise queens is our variable weather. If we're mating queens and the weather looks like this for a week, we're not going to get very good queens, so we might as well bought the damn things and put them in the hive. So we have to focus on mating these queens at the best time we can. Early spring, there's no use trying to meet our early spring queen demand, because first off, there isn't enough sexually mature drones to be able to mate those queens. So we have to push that back a little bit. We push the mating season back into summer. Summer is a lot more predictable than the variable spring weather. Okay. So unpredictable weather is one disadvantage. It leads to inadequate mating, and queen rearing is a lot of work. It's very schedule orientated. You have to keep to your schedule, and there's no flexibility on that. When those queens are ready to transfer on day 10 after graft, you've got to move them out, otherwise they're hatching. They don't care if you aren't ready for them. Yeah, this, like I was mentioning, we're unable to meet our early queen management needs. So we have to have a bit of a shift in management strategy. So we have to think a way of, as I was showing you yesterday, a way I take my splits, we'll just strip the boxes off and then you could drop queen cells into those. I don't do that anymore because I don't have queens available for that. So what I do instead is I make up a bunch of nukes. So we have to switch thinking of this more in a 2-year project, okay? So I've shifted into a 2-year project, and I focus my queen rearing that best suits to make these queens. So I'm trying to, instead of trying to make these queens to suit that early demand, I've pushed it into summer. So I'm targeting my best time where I can make these queens. And I'm using all that split strength, which would go where I originally would drop the queen cell in. I go through and I use all that split strength to make into nukes, okay? So I'm taking that split strength, that surplus strength, and just making a shit ton of nukes out of them. And at the same time, I'm pulling revenue off these hives, off these nukes. I'm able to raise these nukes in this fashion. I'm going to show you how to do it. But I can get these guys to make as much honey as some of those single producers. So in effect, my biggest cost on my farm is syrup and labor, and then it was queens. Sometimes it's labor and syrup and queens, but now I've eliminated the queen expense from my statements, and I've actually added revenue because of the system I've adopted.
How much more labor do you need for your queens?
It's almost another person. And through the spring, I'm busy splitting the hives, and I have a beekeeper that I've trained to work with me, and her job is to make the queens for me. So I just leave her alone. She can spend as much time as she needs. When she's done that, she comes out to me. But it's pretty much one beekeeper.
So you are paying more for queens than that person? She's
there anyways, yeah. I've kind of shifted her into that job role, and it kind of complements my work at the same time.
Do you ever sell any extras, or do you keep them all for yourself?
I keep them for myself. There's people bugging me to sell, but I don't feel experienced enough to sell queens yet. Not like our bulls. We're very experienced, we know what I'm doing, but I'm not familiar enough with it yet to be able to sell to people. But the queens I'm producing are fantastic. But, so I'd have no problem that way. But to sell a product, you need a bit of experience behind you, I believe. So middle of May, this is our split. I'm not going to get into how we split. That was talked about yesterday, but for purposes of this talk, the queen's down here and my split's up here. Here's my queen excluder. So up here is my brood frames, my surplus brood frames and bees. So they're ready to be taken off the hive now. Carrie comes around, we come around after this. So this box here is the surplus bees. The queen's down here, separate the queen excluder. So there's 4 frames of brood in this hive. So we come down, I use an easy loader and have my nukes all set up on pallets. So I come down, drop my pallets down, and she comes, we come around and we drop 2 frames of brood, a frame of honey and foundation in these boxes, and we just go through all the whole yard, take all the surplus strength and just make nukes is all we're doing. So we fill them up, put them on the truck. The other way we make nukes, if we don't have enough surplus strength, let's say in the apiary, or we want to make up more nukes, we walk into a yard. I just pick a yard. This is the yard we're going to go into. And then so they're double deeps there. We go through and we just slash the whole yard down. We just take all the brood from those guys. So 2 frames of brood and honey, that's my criteria for the nuke. So we're just filling boxes of equal strength here. So this hive here, we've taken like 3 or 4 frames of brood, and we're spreading it out between the nukes to make very common strength nukes through the whole operation. And we're leaving maybe, you know, a frame of grid that doesn't really might not meet the grade. So just something to stick those returning foragers back and the old queen stays in there. So then later on, I forget about this yard, I fill this with foundation, I forget about that yard for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, come back to it, maybe re-queen the hive and then carry on with life.
Do you have to find the queens for that?
Yes, and that's very interesting. I did a small trial last year where I figured out, why am I finding the queen? Because then I just make these nukes up, don't find the queen, take everything, and then just drop the cell in, and that virgin should go and kill that old queen.
No,
So
the queen shoots out the staff.
I did find that happening, but I painted the old queen, and I found that virgin was emerging, but she wasn't killing the old queen. The virgin was dying, so I wasn't actually effectively. I always thought it worked that way. The new queen always kills the old one, right? And they were hatching out, but the bees have me standing on my head sometimes. So I don't know what's going on. So what I do is I find the queen and leave her in there to stick the bees back to that box, because there's bees coming to that box anyways. And I can keep that hive going into next year. I can use these guys that will build up through summer, and I can fill in dead spots if I want to.
But you still have to, that's where you have to stop and then go look for that queen.
In this process, when we're slashing down the yard, we do look for the queen, because we're very intensive into that. Yeah. So it's very specific work in this.
Are you marking the queens for easy finding?
No, we don't. No. We do a lot of hive tagging. You'll notice I have hive tags here to try to identify what kind of breeding stock I have in there, where they come from, and how old the queens are and such. But I'm finding lots of supersedures, and so tagging them like that would help me figure out if that queen's actually what I have on the tag there. So maybe I should be tagging these or marking these queens. But that's a lot of work too.
Are you going to talk about how you choose your breeders?
Choose? No, I'm not going to talk about how I choose them.
That's proprietary information.
That's probably a whole subject of its own. I can kind of drift upon that subject in a bit. So then after the nukes are made up, whichever way I make them up, we take them out to our mating yards. And I found the talk yesterday about drone congregating site very interesting. We want these mating yards close to where drones are going to be flying, okay? So we've got to make sure we have bees close. We have a lot of open pasture with cattle farmers, so we have wide areas of pasture, protected bush. So we have nice bee yards back home. We want to set these hives down. You notice I have different colors here. These are supposed to be different colors, and then my orientation of the entrances are different, just to help the queen get back to the original hive. That's very important, especially when I'm trying to do things on a more of a scale method, where I'm not lifting as much and not having them on pallets. If we have 3 in a line here, if all facing the same way, that queen might get lost coming back, right? So this just helps her out a little bit. Get back to the right box, it works quite well. We want to scatter them out, and everybody knows you need landmarks and all this. So we're doing as much as we can to help the queen get out and then get back to her hive, okay? So that's what we've got to do. So cell building, this is a huge learning experience for me. What we're trying to do is manipulate the hive to do what the hive does naturally, but on a mass scale, right? So there's a ton of different ways of doing this, and you go on BSource, or you find these Facebook groups, the Queen Breeders Group. There's a lot of information there, and there's some good people giving some good advice. So I've tried many different cell building techniques. So you can have the queenless or a queen right starter, finisher. Just manipulate your hive in a certain way through the year. The key is, the common rule is lots of young bees. Okay, that never changes. Lots of feed on hand. Don't try to fight the environment when there's lots of pollen coming in and lots of nectar. That's when you make queens, because that's when they want to make queens, and that's when you're most successful. And I always have feed on at the same time and supplement at the same time, just to try to jolt their diet a bit, just trying to promote all the best conditions here. So what I've settled on was a queenless, a perpetual queenless cell builder. I find it a lot easier to manage this way. It takes a little bit of management to keep introducing young bees into this system. But you're not having to deal with the queen in there, moving her back and forth, up and down. They're queenless all the time. You know they're queenless, and you just keep adding fresh bees to them all the time. So I found this to be the most effective way. The way I organize my queenless starter, so my top box here, so what I do is I need about 10 or 12 builders, okay? And what I do is I take a yard, I have 40 yards, I take that yard, I take that yard, and that's the yard that I'm going to be using to boost this building yard. So I don't worry about taking the productiveness out of that yard. I'm just focused on taking those bees to make my queens, okay? So I'm not short on bees. So I stock these guys with a heck of a lot of bees. The top box is I have my feeder here somewhere. And then I have a honey frame, full pollen frames, usually spring pollen, especially maple or some of that early spring pollen is gold. So I use that, and I run 2 graft frames in between the pollen frames. So it's like a honey frame, or a feeder, honey, pollen, graft, pollen, honey. And then I have on the outside, I have a foundation frame just so I can take the foundation out so I can manipulate these hives really easily. The bottom box, because I have so many bees in this box, I want this hive, I forget what the ratio is, like is it 500 nurse bees attends a queen cell or something. So you need a lot of young bees in here to rear 60 cells. So I really pack them full, and that bottom box is basically just a box of foundation, and that just gives them a place to hang out, okay? And it gives them a place to put that extra resource coming in so they can draw wax. Instead of webbing up my graft frames, they can draw it down here. Just gives them a place to put their wax. So that's why I have 2 boxes there.
And that's just bare foundation?
That's bare foundation. That's basically my hive activity is in the top box. Underneath is just instead of hanging out the front, they might as well be hanging on foundation and drawing it out.
How often do you have to replace that to put bare into there?
I'm rearing queens over 2.5 weeks, and I need quite a few cells within a 2 or 3 week period. So I'll go through my breeders, maybe send them through twice. And if they fill it out, I might give them some more work to do later on. But if they fill that box out, that's cool.
You don't give them any larva or anything with smell or anything?
No, I don't. I just take these and I take the frames. Yeah, I take the frames with the young, and they just shake it in, and I just shake a heck of a lot of bees in there. So in a sense, I'm still that.
Like a shook swarm starter.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm doing. There's varying techniques on this. When you have the graft frame here and a graft frame there, so I can put a graft frame in here. In 5 days, I can switch it over to here and put a new graft frame in there, and that way they continue on with their royal jelly production. So it's a continuous. So it's not a start-stop cycle. With the queenless starter finishers, it's nice to be able to keep them going. Once they start producing that jelly, you just keep adding graft frames.
3 days.
Yeah, and just keep that cycle going.
Do you only ever have 2 graft frames in there, or do you move the grafts down in the bottom?
I've only ever used 2, but I have like 10 of these builders going at one time.
When it says you have a bi-weekly boost of seal brood and cooked bees, so where do you put in your seal brood?
Yeah, I put seal brood in there, but I've kind of backed away from that.
Okay.
Yeah, seal brood is such a pain in the ass because you got to keep checking it for emergency cells, right? And then you have that little cell that you can't see because it's embedded in the damn brood, and then it hatches out, and then before you come back and you collect your cells, and they're all torn down. So I know a breeder that tells me, you gotta have brood in there, you gotta do this, and that's what they do, and they do it very well, but I found it very effective just to have like a lot of young bees in there, and then kind of.
You don't put seal brood in the.
No, I kind of backed away from that, but I'm adding lots of bees all the time. So And mind you, this is like only over a 2 or 3 week period, so I'm not trying to sustain this over a whole summer like some of these queen breeders do. So they might have to boost their management style a bit differently if you have to sustain this thing all the way through summer. So this is what I do. I'm forever counting on my fingers and toes on when we graft and how many days after graft for the seal, and then when do we transfer them, when do they hatch, and when do we cage them, and all this kind of stuff. And we have 10 going. And so what I made, it just helps me out. I don't know if it'll help you guys out, but I thought I'd show you. I just made like a, what do you call this thing? Like
A chart?
Yeah, spreadsheet. Yeah, like a slide rule is what I'm trying to come. So I have my, from day 0 on the top and how old that larvae is, and then I have from after graft. I count my work after graft, and this just gives me a timeline. So then I have my days of the month here, and I just simply slide that. I have the thing on my wall, and I'm not as technology savvy as most guys are. So a lot of guys have this on their phone, but I just use it and just slide this thing down and say, oh yeah, so I'm grafting on May 6th. So what does that mean? Well, they're going to be capped on the 11th, and then they got to be transferred on the 16th, 17th, because they're going to be hatched on the 18th there. So it just gives me, and then what about this hive over here? Well, I just slide that down and just to adjust, just to help me keep things organized in my head a little bit. So that's just a little tool I use. I would suggest there's online, you can find where you punch in a date and it gives you all the numbers. It just helps you out.
How do you adjust things if the weather's been really warm, you move things ahead a little bit, the queens can emerge a little earlier probably?
Pardon me, sorry.
Take into account the really warm weather with the queens, do you emerge in a day early or something like that?
Yeah, my rule of thumb is when I'm transferring my cells out of my incubator is on day 10 after graft, because on day 11, I call those hot cells. They could hatch anytime, because day 12 they're going to hatch. So I put in like 2 or 3 days there. You don't know. You can adjust your incubator temperature too to kind of slow down the hatch or speed it up a little bit. I don't do that, but I know producers who fine-tune things like that. So I just go a basic 10-day, this is what I'm putting them in, let's go. That's basically what I do. I rotate through 5 breeder hives in my builder yard. I have 5 selected breeders out there. They've been selected over the last 2 years. 2 years of selection. So you're going through and you're looking for all the characteristics and traits in them. Bring in new traits if you want. But that's very important, because you don't want to be breeding mutts like poor stock. You want your good stuff. So this is where you can really focus on your operational. Like every area is a bit different. Every bee reacts differently to the area. So then you can select for the bees that work best in your area. So this is where this really comes full circle. That we're taking the bees that work best in our operation. Some bees don't want to work for me, so I don't breed from those ones. I work for the breeds that want to make me money. So Carrie goes into this brood frame looks terrible, but you have to understand this is a breeder hive and we're digging into this breeder all the time, so we're disturbing them and we're pulling larvae and whatever. So right here is fresh larvae she's selected. We don't manipulate the breeder at all, we just go in and find the frame that's suitable. She pulls in with her truck. She likes to do the grafting in the truck. I don't do any work. Carrie, I work good with the hammer. Carrie's really good with the grafting tool. So she does all my grafting. She has everything set up. These cells have been we made these up in the morning. We put them in the hive in the morning, let the bees clean them up, polish them up a little bit. In the afternoon, after lunch, she goes out, does her queen work. Distilled water just to keep her tool moist, and then she has the radio going, and nice and comfortable inside the cabin. And then we do a dry graft. We used to prime the cells, but we found it a waste of time. If you feed your breeders up properly, if they're well fed, those eggs are going to hatch, and they're going to slap down into like a great big bath of royal jelly, and they're easy to graft from, because then you just scoop up all this jelly. So we keep our breeders well fed, and it just seems to transfer that larvae so much better. And when she's done grafting, she immediately covers the the bar with a warm, damp cloth. So she graft two bars, and then cover to the damp cloth, and then she transfers it, because you don't want them drying out. So that's what we do. So 24 to 36 hours after, we count our acceptance, and it's best just to leave them the heck alone. But I gotta know what's coming ahead. I have to know how many's accepted if I have a bad graft, and then all of a sudden we don't have any queen cells that I need. So we go through and count them. And we've been getting pretty good luck. We, 95% acceptance is great. Carrie makes it a challenge, so she's been hitting a few 100% acceptances, which is really good. I like to see that. This is what you want to see 36 hours after the graft. A well-fed hive with lots of young bees in the queen-rearing spirit will draw out all your graft larvae. These cups are good. I love these, the plastic cups, because you can see what's going on inside of them. You can see through it. So they're all filled up with royal jelly. So the larvae in there just swimming. And then they're dropping down the cell walls. So there's lots of nourishment coming into this hive, lots of young bees, producing lots of wax. You want them in the queen building spirit, so they build even cells down. I like to see uniformity in my cells and such. I don't know if it makes a difference, but it just looks better, and it must be.
How many cups do you put per bar? There's 2 bars in the frame.
Yeah, 15 and 15, so every frame holds 30, and then I put 2 frames per starter is what I do, which gives them a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I've adopted the practice of using an incubator, and I tapped into a government program to buy me this fancy thing from Georgia. And most guys I know just use an old fridge and a light bulb with a circulating fan, which does the trick. So I bought this thing, and the reason I would suggest anybody who's thinking about producing more than a few hundred queen cells is to buy something like this, because there's nothing more frustrating than having to dig into your finisher, pulling out cells when it's raining. The bees are miserable, you're miserable. You've got to pull them out, and if you don't use them all up, you have no place for the cells. So what we do, we keep this thing at 92 degrees. This number here varies between guys. You can never really hammer down so I found 92 degrees to be perfect where I'm doing. I know somebody runs 93, I know somebody runs 91, so I don't know. But I run 92, and I keep the humidity high. I put the queen cells in here on between day 8 and day 9, and we pick a nice day. We transfer them out of the hives, and we drop them into the incubator. So now they're just in here waiting for me to use them. So I can use these guys anytime I want. I just go in there, pull the queen cells out, and I don't have to dig through a hive if the weather's miserable. Because there's a timeline to meet. You gotta stick to that schedule, and regardless of what the weather is, that schedule has got to be met. Okay. And my kids, as soon as they get an incubator, they make chicks. So it's multi-purpose. Okay, so 10 days after graft, I like to transfer them into the nukes that we're making up. Day 11 I call hot, because you're going to find some of these guys hatching. Early hatchers, they're a pain. But the way I manage them is when we transfer the cells into my incubator, I put them into this little foam case. And what this does is, I'm a little bit late transferring cells, and we get some of those early hatchers. They hatch and they stay in that foam, and they don't disturb anything else that's in the incubator. So it kind of helps that way.
So, how long are they inside the incubator?
I transfer them in there between day 8 to day 10. So they're in there for only about 2 days or so, or 3 days. And that just allows me the flexibility to go get the cells conveniently anytime I want. So then I'm not digging through the hive through incremental weather. So yeah, so I found this handy because then I put this carry case in here. So I transfer them in this carry case. So I basically, when we have like 100 or 200 nukes made up already, ready to put the cells in, we just transfer the foam into my carry case, which is warm, heated. This is pretty expensive, but most guys I know use just like a lunchbox, insulated lunchbox with a heat pad, like a water heat pad, just to keep those cells warm. You have to keep them warm, you can't let them chill. It's very critical. You want to keep the temperature up, you got to get them transferred into a hive. You can't let them chill, because when they chill, well, they will either die or they'll become non-thrifty. So you want to make sure you transfer them at 92 degrees. Webbing is everybody's curse. When you're producing an environment where you have a heck of a lot of young bees in there and all these resources are coming in and you want them to build wax, but you don't want them to put the wax there, like how do you manage this? So I found when narrow grafting bars seems to be the best suited to not getting webbing. Keep them tight. I found keeping them tight, they don't build the wax as bad. That box foundation underneath gives them a place to put that wax, gives them a place to put it, so they're not storing it in the empty space. They're putting it down there. And we always carry a razor knife. You know, it happens. So you just got to deal with it. So you just cut them out. Those cells are still good. It's just you gotta cut them out so a queen can still chew her way out. Okay, so that's what I do to. That's how I manage my builders. So that's my way. There's a ton of different ways of doing it. This is how I do it, and it works really well for me. So 18 days after the hatch, so we drop the cells into these nukes now. They're into the mating yards. The queens have hatched. They're out mated. They come back, and we're going through 18 days after to check for acceptance. I had an old beekeeper come to me and said, you know, in 18 days, he said, you got to remember, these are old German bees. They need at least 22 days or 25 days to mate. And I said, yes, but this is my workload is extreme at this time, so I want to get these guys, this brood is hatched, those queens are laying. They're working on the outside frames because there's honey coming in. The honey flow's already started. And we need to get boxes on top of these guys, otherwise all of the good hives are going to swarm on me. So I got to get space on top of these guys. I can't wait for 25 days. So what I'll do is you go into a hive that's maybe a little slow in queening itself, you can kind of tell that hive is good, it just needs more time. So we'll put them aside. But for the most part, we're pretty brutal. We'll just go through, these guys are good, these guys aren't, and we just shake them and put them away, and we take everything with us. Usually, these last couple of years, 95% of them have been good. So we fill in the dead spots. Nectar's coming in, the foundation's being used. Okay, yeah, so we're checking just for queen acceptance carriers, they're just checking for quality. We're really strict on the quality. If she's not mated properly, don't keep her. So we shake those ones out. And then we fill in the dead spots, and then they need supering right away. So this is where it gets interesting. This is my mating yard along one of our back roads by one of our pastures. So I use the easy loader to do all my work. So we fill in the dead spots, just pick them up, put them on the truck. And then I take them out to the honey yards out in the fields. We have a lot of land, so we scatter. There's canola. There's some places all you can see is yellow all the way around. There's canola everywhere, so there's a lot of resource coming in. So I got to manage my workload. So these guys are full of bees. They're ready to produce. So I got to figure out a way to be able to keep them content and not swarm, and someplace to put all that honey. So I don't want to be sorting through these guys all the time, taking honey out, and I don't want to put irregular equipment over top of them to match the box, because that just adds a whole different layer of workload to me. So I send these guys into my honey production schedule. They get tagged right on the back of my honey pole. We put so out of these three, we put 2 queen excluders. One on this side, one on this side. So the queens cannot leave that box, okay? That's very important. The queen has to stay in that box. So we put the queen excluder, keep them down, but these bees can come up, and these bees will mingle, and they'll merge and then mingle. And they're so focused on that honey coming in, and they're looking for places to put it. They don't care. They don't care if that queen's different than that one. They just come up and they just start honey production. So I'm running a multiple queen system here. So they're sharing space. And by doing this, I can send them into the honey flow and tag them onto the back of my production hives and just treat them exactly like my producers. same equipment, same everything, same work strategy, same everything. We just go through them. We do the same with 5 frames. I started with 5 frames. They're not as neat and tidy. Like you have space here between the boxes because 2 5 frames, and by the time you get the space for equipment, it doesn't match underneath the same as my 6 frames do here. My 6 frames fit beautifully. 6 frames are made for this style of beekeeping. So we
started with 4 frames.
Like from the split, you're saying?
Yeah.
2 frames of brood.
1 of honey and 1 foundation.
Yeah, and then 2 frames of brood of honey, and then fill in the blank. You can put comb in there, you can foundation, but there's 6 frames.
The box always 6.
Yeah, always 6 frames. So the criteria is 2 brood though. That's the important part in the honey, so they don't starve. And then the rest you just use up spare equipment or foundation. And always have foundation because that buys you a leeway, right? Buys you time. So this system works. Most guys use 5 framers, and they do the same thing. They just take the honey and put it straight up. Don't use plastic excluders if you're going to try to do this, because plastic, you can't seal the boxes and the queens will get through. I've learned that the hard way. So use metal bound excluders so it stays tight to the box and those queens can't merge. That's the important part of this whole thing, is those queens can't get through. And have the entrances facing opposite directions is just what I do. Helps orientate those bees in the bottom. So then later on in the year, if the bees are always used to going in there, always used to going on the other side, then in the fall when they come back, they don't overload on one side or the other. It's not as bad drifting at the end of the year. So just help with the orientation a little bit. Yeah, and I just send them straight into my honey flow. So these guys, so those 2 brood frames I put in there with that queen cell, and they're like light years behind the rest of my apiary, are still producing. Like there's 3 boxes packed full of honey there at the end. So these guys are producing this last year we ran out of honey in August, so I didn't produce anything on my nukes because there was no honey to be taken. But the year before that I was producing over 100 pounds per nuke. That's pretty good for nukes, right? So all that revenue is coming in is kind of offsetting costs that are incurred because you're building them, and you have some to boot. And then, okay, so we strip the honey off. They're back down to their nukes. We're into fall. Disease, I'm not going to talk about disease. That's a different talk. But control your disease. But so now they're in their winter nest, and I feed them up. I feed them pretty heavy. I feed these guys 50 pounds. So I randomly weigh to make sure these guys are weighing up to 50 pounds because they gotta have food to make it through the winter. That's very important. So pack them full of feed. And I winter inside. I know guys, this strategy doesn't hinge on indoor wintering. I know guys that winter outside. They have 12 together and they just wrap them up. Sometimes they stack them too high, so you have all separated. But lots of different ways of doing it, especially here. I guess it would be a little milder but wetter. But at home it's cold, terrible cold and windy. So I bring my bees inside just to control those environments. So that's what I do. The next spring I put them out. They get set out. This is their first flight. And I move them into their summer yards. So at this time, I believe in keeping my bees as tight as they can be through the initial stages of spring, just because I think they're more thrifty that way. And so I'm keeping them tight. I'm making them build that really good spring nest. So this is a picture of last year. These guys are like 5 frames of brood in here already, and it's cold. Like this last spring we ran into a cold week and we're supposed to be transferring these guys. These brood's about to hatch, but we can't transfer these guys into the bigger box in cold weather or it'll just shock the hive and you get nothing but, you set them back. And I didn't want to do that. So you sometimes you walk the line, right? If this brood all hatched on me and I still didn't transfer them, they'd all be swarming already. So the weather finally changed for us, and we started switching our bees out, and we're busy. Like we had 400 hives or nukes to transfer out, so we had the crew going fast as we could go, because these guys are on the verge of swarming. They haven't started yet, but you can tell they're thinking about it. So what we do is I set them out like this, and I transfer them into my single boxes, and I always transfer ahead of their entrance, right? So when they're flying into their nuke, you transfer them into a new box. They just come in the same flight path into their box, right? So you're working with them. Whoops. So here we are, transferring them into singles. This hive here is facing this way, so here's my pallet I set out with the empty box. These frames just get taken from here into there. And we give them more space, give them comb on the outside, and as soon as you do that, that nest just goes, ah. It's kind of like that. They just spread out, and life is good. And then we come by with a second box and put it on top, and then we just, that second year after we've made these nukes, we just treat them exactly like singles. And they are very productive. Those young queens, through that first year, you confine her a little bit, they're making honey. That queen is just, she's got the spark and she's ready to go. You get her through the winter and she comes alive with that fresh pollen, and these will be your best producers the next year, guaranteed. So I found a lot of success with these guys. Yeah, so just to sum it up, this you have to, the old mindset of the beekeepers back home, you make your split, you drop the queen in, you turn it into a hive, you produce honey. So to get off that mentality, you have to kind of think outside the box a bit. Turn into a 2-year strategy. Think of those nukes as queen banks, just to get them into the next year. Use them as replacement queens, or just put them straight into singles for next year's growth. Queens are reared during the best conditions. We target the best conditions of mating. And we're using all the bees within the operation to build these bees. And to manage our workload, we basically just, we're managing the nukes as honey producers. So they go right into the back end of the typical workload. And we pull revenue off these nukes and cover all the costs, and maybe a little bit extra at the end. I put a lot of attention towards queens because I believe young queens, just like any other animal herd, you want youth in your stock. So you got to have a good base of youth. You don't want them all to be youthful. Like in a good cattle herd, you have, you do have some 15-year-old cows, but you target around the 5 to 8-year-old, because those are the most productive cows in the herd. So you continually refresh your stock, right? You call up the old dead ones and you continually bring in the young, and you're going to have a more thrifty operation overall that way. So that's what I have to say. Any questions?
You have a separate solid bottom board for the nukes?
Yeah, every hive is like its own hive. Every nuke is its own hive. Separate bottom board. That queen cannot get into the other hive. So it's like a unit on its own. Just with that queen excluder allows them to share the space over
Yeah,
top.
but the bottom board is solid.
It's a solid bottom board. I don't.
With the,
Yeah, I don't want to use any screen bottom boards or anything like that.
No, but you don't have these nukes separately that you can move just one. You have to move.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that would be handy. But because I do everything with the easy loader, I screw those bottom boards down, so then when I lift up that pallet, I don't have nukes flying all over the place. So it's a bit of a disadvantage one way, because to fill in dead spots, I have to actually remove that hive from the bottom board, like almost in a sense opening up the hive, shifting. Where if I could move the whole hive like some guys do, use the whole complete unit, you're not disturbing the hive to fill in dead spots. Yes?
Do you requeen your singles, like your regular hives that you have?
Yeah, I used to, yes. I will, when I go through my assessments in the spring, my initial assessment, a second assessment, if I find hives failing, like on a downward trend of production, I tag those hives. And then later on in the summer, if they're still going. We also mate queens our own through the summer, and we'll take those mated queens, target those flagged hives, and requeen them at that time. So we're requeening. We just don't blanket requeen. We requeen flagged hives is what we do.
So how long would the typical queen last?
2 years. This third year, so if I'm going to produce that queen, she's going to be very productive that second year. That third year, I'm thinking about shifting her out already. Longevity seems to be a concern. I used to, I don't want to talk too openly here, but I did a lot of finger pointing to import stock because my queens aren't as thrifty. Everybody's complaining about poor queens, right? So I'm as bad as a lot of guys. Is those import queens my problem? So that's another reason why I shifted to making my own queens, for a lot of reasons. But last year, I had a very productive year last year. But last year, I had about 5% swarming, but I had like 50% supersedure. And that's old queens, that's new queens, that's superseded queens, that's every time, there's no correlation going on in there, the age of queen and the queen replacement that I'm finding. And I don't know what that is. It could be maybe as external influences coming in, or maybe it's the damn amatraz they're putting in their hives, because it just so happens we found the problem just when we started using Apivar. I don't know, there's a lot of compounding problems that I don't know what's going on, but that's what I'm seeing anyways.
How many hoops do you normally overwinter?
We've been, we try to overwinter about 400 is what we do. And by doing that, my operation just seems to get bigger. So I gotta learn how to sell bees now. So that would be a new venture for me, but as long as my bees keep surviving, then by doing that, you just keep growing. So I gotta find a selling strategy in this whole cycle. Yeah.
Do you have your own hives in your breeder yards, or?
That's something we're looking into, because I think that's very important, especially when you get traits like, I think gentleness is tied to the drone. That's, I'm pretty sure about that. Anyways, but you want to influence your mating with male stock, right? And we haven't done that. I try to locate my yards around my bee yards, so I have an influence of last year's breeding program all the time, if you know what I mean. So there's always that background level of my breeding in my stock anyways. And diversity is very important, I believe. So, but saturating the drone breeding congregated sites with traits like that, we haven't got into that yet.
Do you cull out your drone comb when you're going through your colonies, or do you just leave it?
Yes, yeah.
Do you?
I think the drone comb, I want my comb to be worker comb is what I want, because I want them to be in the spring. I want that queen using that space that she's as workers, because that's my rejuvenation of the nest. And when the best time for me to mate my queens, I feel, is when they're wanting to make drones. So they're making drones on the edges then. They're making drones on the bottom, on bird comb and all this kind of stuff. So there's a heck of a lot of drones being raised at that time, so I kind of feed off that. And I'm breeding a little bit later to catch those drones.
Notice your bottom boards are sloped and there's like leaf space is not
Yes.
an issue. Do you have a lot of bird comb under there?
Yes, that's a problem with these hives. This particular style, there's a box builder back home, Murray Lewis, maybe you guys have bought equipment from him. Fantastic box builder. My style of beekeeping is flat bottom boards with my 2 hive pallets, and I love that. His style is that slope bottom, because he believes in, and they're really handy when you're putting out mating nukes, because you don't have to worry about pooling water in the bottom. You just set them down, and you don't have that pooling water problem. He believes that it helps with the air circulation within the hive, and keeps the hive drier, he figures, and keeps chalk brood problems under control. So he's got this big slope bottom board, causes problems, a big entrance like that, but I generally don't have problems grouting and stuff, and we just scrape the bottom board. So I just deal with
You
it.
just get your drone comb you need.
And drone comb at the bottom. So I just deal with it, yeah. There's a question over here. Okay. Yes.
Yes, can you get enough feed into them for the winter on a 6-frame nuke?
That's why you gotta feed them up. You feed them 50 pounds. And you gotta remember, we're not talking like a big 8-frame single going into
But
winter.
you can't get 50 pounds of feed when you've got 2 or 3 frames of brood.
But you gotta remember, this time of year, these hives are going broodless, right? So the queen is, back home, my queen, there's always gonna be a bit of brood in there, I'm not gonna argue that, but there's not gonna be a lot. So when those winter bees hatch out, there's all that vacant space. So we backfill that nest with syrup. And that's what they use for the first half of the winter, they use that up, and then the last half of winter, they use the rest of it up in there. And generally, these nukes, and my singles for that matter, they get through on that amount
They
of
do
feed.
get through.
Yeah, they get through.
Even if you have bad weather in the spring.
Well, I'm not gonna lie to you, in April, if we have a late winter and there's still this much snow, I'm thinking they're gonna be starving. So I start pacing. But sometimes I lose the big ones. Not very often, not since I started feeding these hives up. I'm a big believer, there's a lot of debate about this, but I'm a big believer about giving it to them in the fall and then sorting out all the details in the spring. If they have too much in the spring, you just take some out and give it to the hungry ones, right? So that's what I believe on this. Yes.
Do you have issues in your area with wasps?
Yes.
What's your best solution to that?
I was talking to Rudy Peters, and he showed me a video of his around here where his hives, he actually lost. He figured he lost 10% of his hives just because of the wasp nest, whatever. But he showed me the video, and he had like swarms of wasps out here. We had a wasp problem, but not as bad. I reduced the entrance, so we have a big single hive, like with 15 or 20,000 bees. They stand. I have a little video of it. And they just stand at the hive and just keep shooting the wasps out like this. So yeah, a strong hive will keep the wasps at bay, I believe, but not at the same level of what you guys experienced here this fall. You guys had a lot of wasps here. Yeah.
You told me a lot about feeding. Is it always the same sugar to water ratio, or do you vary it throughout the year?
I buy all my. I used to feed corn syrup, and then I'm not sure if the corn syrup was making the fronts messy or not, or was a nosema. But then I switched to sucrose. So I winter all my feed. All my feed is sucrose bought from D-Mate. It's already a 67% syrup solution made up already. When I switched to sucrose, my hive entrance is all cleaned up. There's no more those messy fronts. There's no more of that nosema. And I'm not sure if that's because I switched from corn syrup to sucrose, or if that's because the species change, the nosema changed from Nosema apis to Nosema cerana. So cerana, yeah. So anyways, I feed sucrose primarily.
And you never cut it below a percentage, right?
No, I'm not, when I feed, I don't feed to stimulate. I find that if I try to dilute my syrup, I run into more problems of fermentation than anything. So if I have to feed these hives, I'm going to make sure they get food into their frames. That's my objective. Just get the food in there so they don't starve and let them do what the heck they want. Nectar's coming in at that time. Open feeding seems to create that stimulative effect anyways. Yeah.
Can you explain the mechanics of your bucket feeders?
My bucket feeders, like the pails?
Yeah.
Yes. Lots of people are asking me that recently, and that's all everybody uses at home. It's just basically a pail. B-Mate sells them, pail. The cap on, you fill full of syrup, and there's 2 holes drilled. I don't have a picture here of them, but there's 2 holes and then a stainless steel fine mesh screen embedded in over top of those holes, okay? So when you tip the pail upside down, there'll be syrup running through that screen until there's enough syrup run out that it creates a suction on the top of that pail. And that surface tension on that screen will hold the syrup in that pail. So the bees will come up. So there's a little bit of waste. I tip the pail over top of the hive hole, and there'll be a little bit of syrup come out for about 20 seconds. But the bees will clean all that up. They come up through, and they'll feed off that stainless steel screen. And it's just like a self-serve buffet. There's just endless amount of syrup there for them to suck down. And it'll pull the syrup out of the pail. So that's what we do.
How fine the screen and where do you get it?
Pardon me?
How fine the screen mesh and where do you
That,
buy it?
I don't know the technical information on the mesh size, but look at, phone up B-Mate.
One screen.
Oh, they've got it.
Yeah, they have rolls that they have it already pre-cut into little circles. If you want lots of it, they'll sell you like meters of this stuff. And you just cut it and you just melt it into a plastic. But you have 2 holes in the pail itself, like 2 holes about 3/4 inch size, to allow the syrup to run into that screened area, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Any more questions?
So you weld yours into the yellow cap?
Yes, there's different, that's on my gallon pails. On my 2.5 gallon pails, they're embedded straight into the plastic. And my gallon pails, there's not as much syrup pressure on that. So I just embed that screen onto the cork and use my cork as my filling hole too. So you've probably seen that online then, yeah.
So that's, that your top cover has a hole.
My top cover as a hole, I have no inner cover except for my foam thing. But my top cover has a little plug. B-Mate sells those too. I just have a 1.5 or 2 inch hole drilled and just put a little plug in there.
You're not running inner covers. What is the strictly you're running between the top cover and the frames?
So my strategy, I used to run inner covers, but I always found it was an extra piece of equipment to kick around. But I still found a need for an inner cover. In our area, it can be windy and it gets cool. And what I do, you don't see, it's just a bubble wrap foam is what I use. I just cut it out the side of the hive and I put it on. And what it does is just creates a seal on the top of that hive. So when you pop your lid, you do your hive inspection, close it back up, you don't have that draft coming into your hive all the time. And it just helps with, like when you're inspecting hives, you open up the hives in a cool time of the year and they get chilled, you're going to run into chalk brood issues. So this just helps seal up the top of the hive. It also helps, I keep it on year round now, for reasons because of pulling honey with the skateboards, it helps seal the top so later in the season bees can't get in and rob their honey back. But also in the spring, early spring and late fall, like this time of year, where you have lots of humidity inside the hive and condensation. And having that insulating layer just helps prevent some more condensation issues during the cold weather. And the hole is matched up with the hole in the cover so that it can feed through that. Yeah.
So does that stick to the top of your hive so you kind of peel it out? Or?
Yeah, and I love it because before, when you have your hive top and you're prying in this damn thing trying to get the lid off the hive, and you're popping and the bees get all, so this, you lift the hive top off and then you just kind of peel the cover back and the bees don't know any different. Then you don't run the risk of the queen being on the top, on the hive top. Your employees come by, open the top, and they throw it off into the bush like that. Well, they're throwing my queen. 5% of the time, the queen could be up there, right? So by doing it this way, they can throw the cover wherever they want, and then they peel the top off, and I know the queen's not going with them. So it just helps with little things like that.
Those rays extend out to the edge of the actual hive frame to seal up the edge?
Exact dimensions of the outside of the box, yeah.
And it's great where it's dry where he is, but here it could be suicide, so with our wet.
Yeah, different areas, different practices, right? So you got to be careful. Listening to guys like me and translating it directly into your operation, you got to understand what your conditions are.
Some operations here use Tyvek as a replacement instead of that insulated top.
Right. Our area tends to be more on the drier side, but it gets really cold and then condensation will rain on the hive. So that's basically why I use it. Just a few I use like that. So, yeah.
So what did you say that inner cover that you peel off, what is it made out of?
I buy from Rona. It's a bubble wrap. It's foil one side. It's kind of an insulation something or other that they use. Just like bubble wrap, It's,
Like the silver stuff?
yeah, one side insulation.
Like a hot water heater?
Yeah, they wrap it around there. It's fairly cheap. You buy a roll for 300 feet for $100 or something like that. It's fairly cheap, easy to put on.
You put that on.
Yeah, so it's just what I
One more
do.
question and we have to wrap up.
Yes.
Do you use in-frame feeders and all?
No, I don't. I used to, but I found in-frame feeders to be a lot of work. And I manage my hives in singles. I need all 10 frames. So I found a lot of work putting the frame feeder in, taking the frame feeder out. So I use all my 10 frames, and if I'm going to feed them, I either feed them with open feeders or bucket feeders on top. I feed externally instead of trying to do it internally. And it just helps with interior moisture issues too. You have open syrup inside, adds to humidity within the hive also. But no, I don't use those. Except for my cell build. I do have a frame feeder in there, and then I have a bucket feeder on top. More humidity.
Well, let's give a thank you.